Book 1, Chapter 17 of Michael Strogoff, Courier of the Tsar. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Michael Strogoff by Jules Verne. Book 1, Chapter 17 The Rivals. Michael was in comparative safety, though his situation was still terrible. Now that the faithful animal who had so bravely borne him had met his death in the waters of the river, how was he to continue his journey? He was on foot, without provisions, in a country devastated by the invasion, overrun by the Emir's scouts, and still at a considerable distance from the place he was striving to reach. "By heaven, I will get there!" he exclaimed, in reply to all the reasons for faltering. "God will protect our sacred Russia!" Michael was out of reach of the Uzbek horsemen. They had not dared to pursue him through the river. Once more on solid ground, Michael stopped to consider what he should do next. He wished to avoid Tomsk, now occupied by the Tartar troops. Nevertheless, he must reach some town, or at least a post house, where he could procure a horse. A horse once found, he would throw himself out of the beaten track, and not again take to the Irkutsk road until in the neighborhood of Krasnoyarsk. From that place, if he were quick, he hoped to find the way still open, and he intended to go through the Lake Baikal provinces in a southeasterly direction. Michael began by going eastward. By following the course of the Obi 2 versts further, he reached a picturesque little town lying on a small hill. A few churches, with Byzantine cupolas colored green and gold, stood up against the gray sky. This is Kolyvan, where the officers and people employed at Kamsk and other towns take refuge during the summer from the unhealthy climate of the Baraba. According to the latest news obtained by the Tsar's courier, Kolyvan could not be yet in the hands of the invaders. The Tartar troops, divided into two columns, had marched to the left on Omsk, to the right on Tomsk, neglecting the intermediate country. Michael Strogoff's plan was simply this: to reach Kolyvan before the arrival of the Uzbek horsemen, who would ascend the other bank of the Obi to the ferry. There he would procure clothes and a horse, and resume the road to Irkutsk across the southern steppe. It was now 3 o'clock in the morning. The neighborhood of Kolyvan was very still, and appeared to have been totally abandoned. The country population had evidently fled to the northwards, to the province of Yeniseisk, dreading the invasion which they could not resist. Michael was walking at a rapid pace towards Kolyvan when distant firing struck his ear. He stopped, and clearly distinguished the dull roar of artillery, and above it a crisp rattle which could not be mistaken. "It is cannon and musketry," said he. "The little Russian body is engaged with the Tartar army. Pray Heaven that I may arrive at Kolyvan before them!" The firing became gradually louder, and soon to the left of Kolyvan a mist collected, not smoke, but those great white clouds produced by discharges of artillery. The Uzbek horsemen stopped on the left of the Obi, to await the result of the battle. From them Michael had nothing to fear as he hastened towards the town. In the meanwhile the firing increased and became sensibly nearer. It was no longer a confused roar, but distinct reports. At the same time the smoke partially cleared, and it became evident that the combatants were rapidly moving southwards. It appeared that Kolyvan was to be attacked on the north side. But were the Russians defending it, or the Tartars? It being impossible to decide this, Michael became greatly perplexed. He was not more than half a verst from Kolyvan when he observed flames shooting up among the houses of the town, and the steeple of a church fell in the midst of clouds of smoke and fire. Was the struggle, then, in Kolyvan? Michael was compelled to think so. It was evident that Russians and Tartars were fighting in the streets of the town. Was this a time to seek refuge there? Would he not run a risk of being taken prisoner? Should he succeed in escaping from Kolyvan as he had escaped from Omsk? He hesitated, and stopped a moment. Would it not be better to try, even on foot, to reach some small town, and there procure a horse at any price? This was the only thing to be done, and Michael, leaving the Obi, went forward to the right of Kolyvan. The firing had now increased in violence. Flames soon sprang up on the left of the town. Fire was devouring one entire quarter of Kolyvan. Michael was running across the steppe endeavouring to gain the covert of some trees when a detachment of Tartar cavalry appeared on the right. He dared not continue in that direction. The horsemen advanced rapidly, and it would have been difficult to escape them. Suddenly, in a thick clump of trees, he saw an isolated house, which it would be possible to reach before he was perceived. Michael had no choice but to run there, hide himself, and ask or take something to recruit his strength, for he was exhausted with hunger and fatigue. He accordingly ran on towards this house, still about half a verst distant. As he approached, he could see that it was a telegraph office. 2 wires left it in westerly and easterly directions, and a third went towards Kolyvan. It was to be supposed that under the circumstances this station was abandoned, but even if it was, Michael could take refuge there, and wait till nightfall if necessary, to again set out across the steppe covered with Tartar scouts. He ran up to the door and pushed it open. A single person was in the room whence the telegraphic messages were dispatched. This was a clerk, calm, phlegmatic, indifferent to all that was passing outside. Faithful to his post, he waited behind his little wicket until the public claimed his services. Michael ran up to him, and in a voice broken by fatigue, "What do you know?" he asked. "Nothing," answered the clerk, smiling. "Are the Russians and Tartars engaged?" "They say so." "But who are the victors?" "I don't know." Such calmness, such indifference in the midst of these terrible events, was scarcely credible. "And is not the wire cut?" said Michael. "It is cut between Kolyvan and Krasnoiarsk, but it is still working between Kolyvan and the Russian frontier." "For the government?" "For the government, when it thinks proper; for the public, when they pay. 10 kopecks a word, whenever you like, sir." Michael was about to reply to this strange clerk that he had no message to send, that he only implored a little bread and water, when the door of the house was again thrown open. Thinking that it was invaded by Tartars, Michael made ready to leap out of the window, when 2 men only entered the room who had nothing of the Tartar soldier about them. One of them held a dispatch, written in pencil, in his hand, and passing the other, he hurried up to the wicket of the imperturbable clerk. In these 2 men Michael recognized with astonishment, which everyone will understand, 2 personages of whom he was not thinking at all, and whom he had never expected to see again. They were the 2 reporters, Harry Blount and Alcide Jolivet, no longer traveling companions, but rivals, enemies, now that they were working on the field of battle. They had left Ichim only a few hours after the departure of Michael Strogoff, and they had arrived at Kolyvan before him, by following the same road, in consequence of his losing 3 days on the banks of the Irtych. And now, after being both present at the engagement between the Russians and Tartars before the town, they had left just as the struggle broke out in the streets, and ran to the telegraph office, so as to send off their rival dispatches to Europe, and forestall each other in their report of events. Michael stood aside in the shadow, and without being seen himself he could see and hear all that was going on. He would now hear interesting news, and would find out whether or not he would enter Kolyvan. Blount, having distanced his companion, took possession of the wicket, whilst Alcide Jolivet, contrary to his usual habit, stamped with impatience. 10 kopecks a word," said the clerk. Blount deposited a pile of roubles on the shelf, whilst his rival looked on with a sort of stupefaction. "Good," said the clerk, and with the greatest coolness in the world he began to telegraph the following dispatch: Daily Telegraph, London. From Kolyvan, Government of Omsk, Siberia, 6th August. Engagement between Russian and Tartar troops. The reading was in a distinct voice, so that Michael heard all that the English correspondent was sending to his paper. Russians repulsed with great loss. Tartars entered Kolyvan today. These words ended the dispatch. "My turn now!" cried Alcide Jolivet, anxious to send off his dispatch, addressed to his cousin. But that was not Blount's idea, who did not intend to give up the wicket, but have it in his power to send off the news just as the events occurred. He would, therefore, not make way for his companion. "But you have finished!" exclaimed Jolivet. "I have not finished," returned Harry Blount quietly, and he proceeded to write some sentences, which he handed in to the clerk, who read out, in his calm voice, John Gilpin was a citizen of credit and renown, a train band captain eke was he of famous